I'm Keith Olbermann, and this is The Resistance. And what, this worst Thanksgiving week since 2001, might we have to give thanks for? One thing, the 25th Amendment, Section 4. History pays little attention to this, but the first time an American president died in office, William Henry Harrison, just 31 days after his inauguration in 1841, nobody was sure what was supposed to happen next. Incredibly, the Constitution was not terribly specific. Did the vice president become acting president? Did his title remain vice president, but he got executive powers? The vice president, John Tyler, decided to have a judge administer the presidential oath, and he spent the rest of his time in the White House refusing to answer to anything except President Tyler. But even as 7 more presidents died in office, the process was still unofficial. Worse yet, twice in the 20th century, presidents became incapacitated while in office. Woodrow Wilson not only suffered a stroke 17 months before the end of his term, but as we are only now truly learning, the stroke affected his ability to fully understand that he had had a stroke. President Wilson fought or fired anybody who suggested he should give up the presidency, permanently or temporarily. Besides which, there were no constitutional means for Wilson to give up the presidency temporarily, and the Constitution still had no official succession process, not for a resignation, and certainly not for a forced removal, because the president could no longer discharge the powers and duties of his office. And then on September 24th, 1955, while playing golf, President Dwight Eisenhower had a heart attack. The stock market panicked. It lost $14 billion in one day. Eisenhower was hospitalized for 7 weeks, and still there was no specific provision for the vice president, Richard Nixon, to even briefly assume any executive powers. Finally, the assassination of President Kennedy in 1963 brought this matter to a head. Not only did the succession need to be spelled out in a constitutional amendment, but so did temporary transfer of power and a new idea that if the vice presidency became vacant, the president should be able to nominate a new vice president. And it also became clear that death or resignation or impeachment could undo an election. If, say, Eisenhower, a Republican, had died or resigned, and Nixon, a Republican, had succeeded him, and then he had died or resigned or been impeached and removed, the constitutional succession meant the Speaker of the House would then become president. The Speaker of the House, for the last 6 years of the Eisenhower term, was Sam Rayburn, a Democrat. Control of the presidency would have changed parties without an election. So, in 1965, the 25th Amendment to the Constitution was proposed, and 2 years later it was enacted. Section 1 spelled out the succession to the vacant presidency. Section 2 allowed the president to nominate a new vice president, which would promptly happen twice in the next 7 years. Section 3 permitted the president to temporarily transfer power to the vice president, which promptly happened for 7 hours and 54 minutes, while Ronald Reagan underwent surgery in 1981. And then there is Section 4, written nearly 52 years ago, more with Woodrow Wilson in mind, and yet it might as well have been named for Donald John Trump. Probably easier if I just read this verbatim. Section 4, whenever the vice president and a majority of either of the principal officers of the executive departments or of such other body as Congress may by law provide, transmit to the President pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives their written declaration that the President is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, the Vice President shall immediately assume the powers and duties of the office as acting President. There's more, but I hope you didn't miss the key point there. No hearings, no doctors, no conferences, no impeachments. The vice president and merely most of the cabinet write to the Speaker, Paul Ryan, and to the Senate President pro tempore, Orrin Hatch, and they say the president's unable to do the job and the vice president becomes acting president. No hearings, no doctors, no conferences, no impeachments, just bye Felicia. Of course, the suddenly suspended president can try to regain power, to resume the section. Thereafter, when the president transmits to the president pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives his written declaration that no inability exists, he shall resume the powers and duties of his office. Round 1, they say he's unfit. Round 2, he says he's fine. He resumes office. Not so fast. There's a round 3. He shall resume the powers and duties of his office unless the vice president and a majority of either the principal officers of the executive department or of such other body as Congress may by law provide transmit within 4 days to the president pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives their written declaration that the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. Yes, invest in popcorn futures. If the vice president and his crew still say the president is unfit, the president is not restored to power. But wait, there's even more. There's a round 4. Thereupon Congress shall decide the issue, assembling within 48 hours for that purpose if not in session. If the Congress, within 21 days after receipt of the latter written declaration, or if Congress is not in session within 21 days after Congress is required to assemble, determines by 2/3 vote of both houses that the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, the vice president shall continue to discharge the same as acting president. Otherwise, the president shall resume the powers and duties of his office. Instant impeachment. 4 days for the vice president and the cabinet to state again that the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties, triggering a vote by the House and the Senate within about 3 weeks, and a 2/3 vote results in the president remaining in office with the title, but without the power. So it's a crazy man clause, right? In the case of Trump, it presumes he behaves as president as he is behaving as president-elect, which is a good presumption because as president-elect, he is behaving as he did as a candidate. For example, 24 of his first 40 tweets after the election consisted of the following: 6 complaints about the New York Times, 4 complaints about the cast of Hamilton, 1 deleted, 1 complaint about Saturday Night Live, 1 complaint about how unfair protesters are, 1 complaint about a news story, 3 boasts about who called to congratulate him on his election, 2 claims that he could have won by a larger margin, 2 lies about keeping a Ford plant from moving to Mexico that was never moving to Mexico, 2 rationalizations about the $25 million he had to pay to avoid a trial for fraud, and 2 promos for television appearances, 1 deleted. For my money, he's nuts. Couldn't pass a sanity test. Open book. But of course, Section 4 of the 25th Amendment here does not say nuts, or impaired, or erratic, or unbalanced, or unhealthy, or bipolar, or narcissist, or sociopath, or psychopath. It only says that the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. The vice president shall immediately assume the powers and duties of the office as acting president. Oh, kind of vague, huh? If he was fine physically, even passable psychologically, the vice president could still clothesline Trump because he was, just to pick a few inappropriate behaviors at random, of course, bringing his daughter to the meetings with the Prime Minister of Japan, or interrupting state business to meet with his Indian partners about Trump Tower Mumbai, or pocketing profits by gently suggesting to foreign diplomats that the president would really like it if they all stayed at his hotel in Washington. Section 4 of the 25th Amendment to our Constitution provides the means, if they have the ethics, the patriotism, and the stones to use it, provides the means to Vice President-elect Pence and Trump's cabinet to remove him from office, basically as soon as the inauguration is over. But of course, not only doesn't Section 4 say anything about doctors or health or psychosis, it also doesn't even say anything about corruption or ethics or disinterest. It doesn't say anything at all about why the president might be unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. It just talks about letters and declarations in 21 days and a 2/3 vote. A Republican vice president and a Republican cabinet and a Republican Speaker of the House and a Republican President pro tempore of the Senate and a Republican House majority and a Republican Senate majority can just do it because they don't trust him, because they don't like him, because it's Thursday. But even if you loathe or fear Trump, you must look at this and say, this can't happen in a democracy. The people voted for him. You can't just unpresident him. The hell you can't. How did Margaret Thatcher wind up becoming the ex-Prime Minister of the United Kingdom? Lost the election? No. Decided to retire? No. Forced out by the votes of just 356 members of the House of Commons from her own party. And she still got the majority of those votes and was forced out anyway. 3 of Britain's last 5 prime ministers became prime minister without first being elected. Winston Churchill became their wartime prime minister in 1940, did not win an election for the job until 1951. So don't tell me this isn't democratic. Not only is the English example pertinent, but among other things, this is in our Constitution right now. And on February 23rd of next year, it will celebrate its 50th anniversary of being in our Constitution. Here's hoping we have a big birthday party that day for it, and I have just the right theme for it. And you know who bursts out of the 25th Amendment birthday cake, right? That's right. Acting President Mike Pence. Happy Thanksgiving. Resist. Peace.